My fiancé spent months calling me ugly every day to break my self-esteem. But I am about to show everyone at his big promotion the real reason he started doing this. It began 4 months ago, completely out of nowhere. Trevor and I had been together for 3 years, engaged for 1. We were at dinner with his parents when he first said it. I'd made a joke about something and he laughed and said, "God, you're ugly when you smile like that." His mother dropped her wine glass. I thought I'd misheard, but then it became constant. Every single day. Morning ugly. How was work ugly? Pass the salt ugly. Not as a joke, not with affection, just stated like fact. When I confronted him, he said I was being sensitive, that he was just being honest and I should appreciate that he loved me despite my looks. He said attraction wasn't everything in a relationship. I asked if he actually found me ugly. He shrugged and said, compared to his usual type, yes, but my personality made up for it. I should have left then. But he twisted it around, said I was vain for caring about appearance, that I should be grateful he saw past my face to who I really was inside. His friends started noticing. They'd look uncomfortable when he'd introduce me as my ugly fiancé at parties. His brother pulled me aside once to ask if I was okay, but Trevor always had an explanation. He was keeping me humble. He didn't want me getting an ego. He was protecting me from becoming shallow. Last week was his company's annual gala. 500 people in a hotel ballroom. Trevor was up for a huge promotion and needed to impress the board. I wore a new dress, got my hair professionally done. When I came downstairs, Trevor looked at me and said, "Well, you're still ugly, but at least you tried." At the gala, he introduced me to everyone the same way. "This is my fiancé. I know she's ugly, but she's got a good heart." People literally stepped back. His boss's wife pulled me into the bathroom to ask if I needed help getting out of an abusive relationship. I said I was fine, just embarrassed. The speeches started after dinner. Trevor was standing near the stage, waiting to be called up for his promotion announcement. That's when a woman approached our table. Stunning woman, looked like a model. She walked straight up to me. "You're Julia, right? Trevor's fiancé?" I nodded. She sat down in Trevor's empty chair. "I'm Natalie. Trevor and I dated for 2 years before you." I'd heard about Natalie. Trevor said she was psycho, obsessed with him, wouldn't leave him alone after they broke up. Natalie pulled out her phone. "I need to show you something. Trevor sent this to me 3 months ago." She showed me a text thread. Trevor begged her to come back, saying he'd made a mistake, saying he'd leave me immediately if she'd take him back, saying I meant nothing to him. And then the part that made everything click. "I've been calling her ugly every day, like you suggested. She's starting to believe it. Her self-esteem is shattered. A few more weeks and she'll be grateful when I leave. No drama, no questions about the prenup. She'll think I'm doing her a favor." Natalie scrolled down. "I didn't suggest anything. He came up with this plan himself when I wouldn't respond to his messages. He thought if he destroyed you emotionally first, you'd let him walk away with everything. The prenup. I'd forgotten about the prenup. If I left him, I got nothing. But if he left me for infidelity or abuse, I got a substantial payout from his trust fund." Natalie stood up. "He's been cheating on you with 3 different women from his office. I have screenshots of everything. He brags about it in our alumni group chat." The promotion announcement was starting. Trevor was walking toward the stage. I stood up and followed him. The CEO was at the microphone, about to announce Trevor's promotion to senior partner. I reached the stage first, grabbed the microphone. "Excuse me, everyone. I'm Trevor's ugly fiancé. You've all met me tonight. He's made sure to tell each of you how ugly I am." The room went silent. Trevor's face drained of color. I just wanted to thank Trevor publicly for showing me exactly who he is, and I wanted to return the favor. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the ballroom's projection system. The giant screen behind me lit up with Natalie's screenshots. Trevor's texts filled the screen in huge letters that everyone could read. His messages to Natalie begged her to take him back. He wrote that he made a mistake choosing me. He promised to leave me right away if she'd just respond. Then came the part that made the whole room gasp. "I've been calling her ugly every day, like you suggested. She's starting to believe it. Her self-esteem is shattered. A few more weeks and she'll be grateful when I leave. No drama, no questions about the prenup. She'll think I'm doing her a favor." People started standing up from their tables to see better. I watched faces change from confused to shocked to disgusted as they read his plan. Trevor lunged toward the stage, but his brother caught his arm and held him back. His brother shook his head slowly, looking at Trevor like he didn't recognize him anymore. The CEO stepped away from Trevor like he might catch something. Board members leaned toward each other, whispering fast and urgent. I saw them pointing at the screen, then at Trevor, then back at the screen. My hands shook, but I kept my voice level. I told the room how Trevor called me ugly every single day for 4 months. Every morning when I woke up. Every night at dinner. At parties where he introduced me to his friends and colleagues as his ugly fiancé. In front of his family at Sunday dinners. In front of strangers at the grocery store. I watched Trevor's mother crying at her table, her makeup running down her face. His father sat frozen next to her, staring at Trevor like he was a stranger. Natalie stood up from her seat and walked to the front of the room. She pulled out her own phone and showed it to the CEO. More screenshots appeared on the big screen. These were from Trevor's alumni group chat. He bragged about sleeping with 3 different women from this office. He named them specifically. He laughed about how easy it was to fool me. The room erupted in shocked voices. People recognized the names. I saw several women at different tables turn bright red. A man in the back stood up and walked out. Another man followed him. The CEO took the microphone from my hand gently. He announced that Trevor's promotion was canceled effective immediately. There would be an investigation into his conduct starting tomorrow morning. Security guards appeared at the ballroom doors. I realized the CEO must have signaled them during my speech. Trevor finally broke free from his brother's grip. He started yelling that I was lying, that I was a jealous psycho who couldn't handle his success, that Natalie was obsessed with him and made everything up, that I probably paid her to help me ruin him. Then Trevor's boss's wife stood up from her table. She told the entire ballroom that she personally witnessed Trevor calling me ugly in the bathroom earlier tonight. She said she offered to help me escape an abusive relationship. Her voice carried across the silent room. She said she should have done more than just offer. She should have called security right then. I walked off the stage on shaky legs. I went straight to Natalie and she hugged me tight. My whole body started shaking like I couldn't control it. The adrenaline that kept me standing on stage was draining away fast. Natalie whispered that she was sorry she didn't come forward sooner. She thought ignoring Trevor would make him stop bothering her. She didn't realize he was destroying me until she saw his texts 3 months ago. Trevor's brother walked over to us. He apologized for not doing more when he pulled me aside at that party. He said he knew something was wrong, but didn't realize how bad it was. He offered to help me get my things from Trevor's apartment safely. He said his wife would come too so I wouldn't be alone. I realized not everyone in Trevor's family was like Trevor. Some of them actually cared. The CEO approached our group and asked if Natalie and I could stay after the gala ended. The company's legal team was on their way to take our statements. Security guards escorted Trevor toward the exit. He was still yelling about lawsuits and defamation. He threatened to sue me, sue Natalie, sue the company. Nobody was listening anymore. People turned their backs as he passed. Some actually moved their chairs to block his path. The ballroom started emptying slowly. Dozens of people stopped by to talk to me. They said they were sorry they didn't speak up when they heard Trevor calling me ugly. A woman from his department said she always thought it was weird, but figured it was some kind of private joke between us. A man from accounting said he almost said something at the last company party but chickened out. Another woman said she told her husband it seemed wrong, but her husband said to stay out of other people's relationships. I thanked each person even though I was exhausted. My feet hurt in these heels. My face hurt from holding back tears. But I kept thanking them because I understood how hard it was to speak up. I understood how easy it was to convince yourself it wasn't your business. I'd done the same thing for 4 months, convincing myself Trevor's behavior was somehow normal or acceptable. The company's legal team showed up within an hour. 3 lawyers in dark suits carrying laptops and folders. They set up in a private conference room off the ballroom and asked me and Natalie to sit down. One lawyer pulled out a recorder and asked permission to document everything. I nodded. For the next 2 hours, we went through every screenshot on Natalie's phone, every text message Trevor sent, every detail of his plan. The lawyers took notes constantly, asking questions about dates and times, and who else might have witnessed his behavior. They explained that Trevor's actions could count as workplace harassment because he targeted women who worked at his company for affairs and used company events to abuse me in front of hundreds of employees. The head lawyer said the company could face liability if they didn't take action, which meant they had motivation to support my case against Trevor. Natalie showed them the alumni group chat where Trevor bragged about sleeping with 3 different colleagues. The lawyers asked for names. Natalie read them off. 2 of the lawyers exchanged looks because they recognized the names from the company directory. One lawyer asked if I planned to pursue legal action against Trevor personally. I said I didn't know yet, that tonight was supposed to be about his promotion, and instead became about exposing his abuse. The lawyer nodded and said that was understandable, but I should consider my options carefully because Trevor's behavior showed a pattern of calculated manipulation. Natalie told the legal team she started saving everything 3 months ago, when Trevor wouldn't stop messaging her. She thought she might need a restraining order eventually because he sent her dozens of texts every week begging her to take him back. She showed them the progression of messages, how Trevor went from apologetic to angry to manipulative, always circling back to promises that he'd leave me immediately if she'd just respond. Natalie said she never imagined the texts would reveal his entire plan to destroy my self-esteem. She thought Trevor was just being a desperate ex-boyfriend, not someone running a psychological abuse campaign designed to manipulate a prenup outcome. One lawyer asked why she came forward tonight instead of earlier. Natalie explained she only realized the full scope when she saw Trevor call me ugly in front of 500 people at the gala. She'd been reading his texts about breaking me down, but seeing him actually do it in public made her understand how serious the situation was. She couldn't stay silent anymore, knowing he was systematically destroying another woman, the same way he'd tried to control her during their relationship. The company's lawyer, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes, turned to me and explained that my prenup might be invalid because of Trevor's fraudulent behavior. She said prenups can be challenged in court if one party used systematic abuse to manipulate the outcome, and Trevor's own text messages proved he deliberately created emotional distress to make me grateful when he left. She pulled out a business card and handed it to me, saying I needed to call this family law attorney first thing tomorrow morning. The attorney specialized in cases involving financial manipulation and psychological abuse in relationships. The lawyer warned me that Trevor would probably try to enforce the prenup and claim I was being vindictive, but his text messages created a strong case that the entire agreement was signed under false pretenses. She said I should gather any other evidence I had of Trevor's abuse, including witnesses who heard him call me ugly, and any documentation of how his behavior affected my mental health. I took the card and thanked her, my hands shaking slightly as I put it in my purse. I went back to the hotel room I was supposed to share with Trevor that night, dreading the confrontation. But when I opened the door with my key card, I found all my belongings already packed and stacked by the entrance. My suitcase sat zipped closed next to my makeup bag and shoes. Trevor had cleared out completely, taking all his things and leaving no trace he'd ever been there. The bed was still made from housekeeping. The bathroom counter was empty except for the hotel toiletries. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at my packed bags, and felt a wave of relief wash over me. I didn't have to see him. I didn't have to hear him yell or make excuses or try to manipulate me one more time. He'd run away, probably hoping to avoid facing me after what happened downstairs. I pulled my suitcase inside and locked the door behind me, then sat on the bed and just breathed for the first time in hours. My phone buzzed around midnight. Trevor's brother texted asking if I was okay and where I was staying. I told him the hotel room number. He replied that he and his wife were coming over. 20 minutes later, they knocked softly on my door. I let them in, and Trevor's brother immediately hugged me, apologizing over and over for not doing more when he pulled me aside at that party months ago. His wife had tears in her eyes as she told me they were horrified by what Trevor did, that they'd been talking in the car about how they should have seen the signs sooner. Trevor's brother said they had a guest room and I could stay with them as long as I needed, that I shouldn't be alone right now after everything that happened. His wife added that they'd make sure Trevor stayed away, that their whole family was disgusted by his behavior. I thanked them and said I'd think about it. But honestly, I was grateful to have somewhere to go, besides back to the apartment I'd shared with Trevor. They sat with me for an hour, making sure I ate something from room service and helping me figure out what I needed to do next. After they left, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing through everything that happened, every moment from Natalie approaching my table to security escorting Trevor out of the ballroom. I sat up in bed and opened my text messages with Trevor, scrolling back through 4 months of conversations. I saw clearly now how he'd isolated me from friends by making me too embarrassed to go out. Every time someone invited us somewhere, Trevor would say something about how I looked, making me feel too self-conscious to be seen in public. My friend group slowly stopped inviting me to things because I always declined. I'd convinced myself I was just tired or busy with work, but really I was hiding because Trevor had destroyed my confidence. Every single comment about my appearance was strategic, designed to keep me hidden away and dependent on him for validation. I read through texts where I apologized for being sensitive when he called me ugly. I read messages where I thanked him for loving me despite my flaws. I wanted to throw my phone across the room, seeing how thoroughly he'd broken me down. The next morning, my phone rang at 8. Trevor's mother's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her at first. She begged me to meet her for coffee, saying she'd been sick about that first dinner when Trevor called me ugly, that she should have done something more than just drop her wine glass. She said she hadn't slept all night thinking about how she'd failed me by staying silent. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near the hotel at 10. I needed to understand if she'd known what Trevor was planning, if she'd been part of his scheme somehow. When I arrived, she was already sitting at a corner table with red, swollen eyes. She stood up when she saw me and tried to hug me, but I stepped back. I wasn't ready for physical comfort from Trevor's family yet. I sat down across from her and asked directly if she knew what Trevor was doing. She shook her head hard and swore she didn't, that she thought Trevor was going through some kind of cruel phase and kept hoping he'd snap out of it. That answer made me angry. I told her hoping wasn't the same as acting, that she'd watched her son verbally abuse me for months and done nothing except look uncomfortable. She started crying again and said I was right, that she had no excuse for her silence. She admitted she'd been afraid of confronting Trevor because he reminded her so much of his father. I asked what she meant. She took a deep breath and told me that Trevor's father had been psychologically abusive to her for years before their divorce. He'd used the same tactics Trevor used on me, breaking down her self-esteem bit by bit until she felt worthless. She recognized the pattern in Trevor's behavior but convinced herself it wasn't the same thing, that Trevor was different from his father. But watching what happened at the gala made her face the truth that Trevor had learned these manipulation tactics from watching his dad destroy her. It didn't excuse her silence or Trevor's abuse, but it explained where he'd learned to be so calculated about destroying someone's self-worth. She said she was in therapy now trying to understand why she'd enabled Trevor's behavior by not speaking up. That afternoon, I met with the family law attorney whose card the company lawyer had given me. Her office was in a downtown building, clean and professional with certificates covering the walls. She shook my hand firmly and told me to call her by her first name. I sat down and she asked me to tell her everything from the beginning. I explained about the prenup, about Trevor's 4-month campaign calling me ugly, about Natalie's evidence of his plan to manipulate me into accepting the breakup without fighting for my rights. The attorney listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, Trevor's scheme was one of the clearest cases of prenup fraud she'd seen. She explained that prenups signed under distress or fraudulent circumstances can be challenged in court, and Trevor's own text messages proved he deliberately created distress to manipulate the outcome. She said we had an extremely strong case for invalidating the prenup completely. She asked if I wanted to pursue it. I said yes without hesitation. She smiled and told me we'd make sure Trevor didn't profit from abusing me. 3 days later, my attorney filed the paperwork at the courthouse downtown. I sat in her office while she explained each document, the emergency restraining order and the petition to annul our engagement contract based on fraud and psychological abuse. She said Trevor's lawyer would fight it, claim I was being vindictive or making things up for money, but the evidence was too strong to ignore. The hearing got scheduled for the next morning, faster than I expected, and I barely slept that night rehearsing what I might have to say. The courtroom was small and cold, just me and my attorney on one side, Trevor and his lawyer on the other. Trevor wouldn't look at me, kept his eyes on the table in front of him while his lawyer argued that I was overreacting to normal relationship problems. My attorney stood up and handed the judge a folder containing printed screenshots of every text message, every piece of evidence Natalie had provided. The judge was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses that she pushed up her nose as she read through the pages. She looked at Trevor once, then back at the documents, then at Trevor again with this expression I couldn't quite read. His lawyer kept talking about how couples fight and sometimes say mean things, trying to make it sound like Trevor just had a bad temper instead of a calculated plan. The judge held up one hand to stop him mid-sentence and said she'd seen enough. She granted the emergency restraining order immediately, said the evidence of systematic psychological abuse was clear and disturbing, and set a court date for the full annulment hearing in 6 weeks. Trevor's face went red and his lawyer tried to object, but the judge was already standing up, case closed. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like I could breathe properly for the first time in months. That same afternoon, Trevor's boss called my cell phone. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number, but something made me pick up. He introduced himself and apologized for what happened at the gala, said his wife had told him everything that night, but he didn't fully understand the situation until the company started their investigation. He said Trevor was suspended immediately pending the results of their internal review into his affairs with employees and his use of company events to publicly abuse me. His voice sounded genuinely upset, like he felt personally responsible for not stepping in sooner. He asked if I needed anything, if there was any way the company could help me, and I told him I just wanted Trevor held accountable for what he did. He promised me they were taking it seriously, that multiple people had already come forward with concerns about Trevor's behavior toward women in the office. I thanked him and hung up, surprised that he'd called me directly, instead of having HR handle it. Natalie texted me 2 days later asking if I wanted to meet for lunch. I said yes without thinking about it, realizing I wanted to talk to someone who understood what Trevor was capable of. We met at a small restaurant near my temporary hotel, sitting at a corner table where we could talk privately. She looked tired, like she hadn't been sleeping well either, and she apologized again for not coming forward sooner with the evidence. I told her she had nothing to apologize for, that she didn't owe me anything and she still chose to help me. She smiled a little and said she wished someone had warned her about Trevor before she wasted 2 years with him. I asked her what he was like when they dated, and she got quiet for a minute before answering. She said he was charming at first, made her feel special and important, but slowly started controlling little things about her life. What she wore, who she talked to, where she went without him. When she tried to break up with him the first time, he convinced her she was overreacting and being too sensitive. It took her 3 attempts to finally leave, and even then he stalked her for months afterward, showing up at her work and her apartment until she threatened to call the police. Hearing her story made me realize how lucky I was that Natalie had saved all those text messages, that I had concrete proof of Trevor's plan instead of just my word against his. We talked for 2 hours, sharing stories about the different ways Trevor had tried to control us, and by the end I felt like I'd found an unexpected friend in someone who truly understood. Trevor's brother called me the next week saying he'd found a small apartment in a safe neighborhood with good security. He offered to help me move my things from Trevor's place while Trevor was at work, and I accepted gratefully because I didn't want to face Trevor alone. We went to the apartment on a Tuesday morning with his truck, and I was shocked by how much of my stuff Trevor had already packed up, like he'd been planning to throw me out anyway. My clothes were in garbage bags, my books in boxes without labels, my pictures and personal items just dumped together in crates. Trevor's brother kept apologizing for his behavior, saying he should have done more when he first noticed something was wrong. We loaded everything into the truck and drove to my new place, a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor with big windows and no memories of Trevor attached to any of it. The apartment was empty and plain, but it felt like mine in a way Trevor's place never had. That night I slept in my new bed in my new apartment with the door locked and my phone on the nightstand, and I slept better than I had in 4 months. No one called me ugly when I woke up. No one made me feel small or worthless, and the silence felt like freedom. My attorney called the following Monday with news I wasn't expecting. She'd been going through my financial records as part of the case and discovered that Trevor had opened a credit card in both our names without telling me. He'd racked up $30,000 in charges over the past 6 months, buying expensive dinners and gifts and hotel rooms, probably for the women he was cheating with. The credit card company had my forged signature on the application, and my attorney said it was clear fraud. She filed additional charges immediately and got a judge to freeze Trevor's bank accounts until we could sort out who owed what. I felt sick thinking about how Trevor had planned every detail, not just the psychological abuse but the financial trap too, making sure I'd be buried in debt when he left. My attorney said the fraud charges were serious, and Trevor could face criminal prosecution if he didn't settle, which gave us leverage to get everything resolved faster. Old friends started reaching out after that, people I'd been avoiding for months because I was too embarrassed to see them. They'd heard about what happened through mutual connections, and they wanted to make sure I was okay. I felt stupid at first, like I should have listened when they noticed something was off about Trevor, but they were all supportive and kind. My college roommate told me she'd been worried when I stopped returning her calls but didn't know how to bring it up without pushing me away. My friend from work said she'd noticed I seemed different around Trevor, quieter and smaller, but thought it wasn't her place to say anything. They were all angry at themselves for not pushing harder, and I realized that's exactly what abusers count on. People staying quiet because they don't want to interfere. We made plans to get together, to rebuild the friendships I'd let fade while Trevor was tearing me down. Trevor started trying to contact me through fake social media accounts after the restraining order went into effect. The first message was an apology, saying he loved me and made a mistake and wanted to work things out. When I didn't respond, the messages got mean, calling me names and threatening to ruin my reputation. Then they'd switch back to apologizing, begging me to give him another chance, promising he'd changed. My attorney told me to screenshot everything and not respond at all, and she filed for a permanent restraining order based on the harassment pattern. The judge granted it immediately when he saw how Trevor was creating fake accounts to get around the temporary order, and the permanent order was included a provision that Trevor couldn't contact me directly or indirectly through any means. The company finished their investigation 3 weeks after the gala and fired Trevor for multiple policy violations. His boss called me again to let me know, explaining that they'd found evidence of relationships with 3 different subordinates, misuse of company resources for personal entertainment, and a pattern of creating a hostile work environment. He said Trevor's career in this industry was basically over because word spreads fast about why someone gets terminated, especially when it involves harassment and abuse. I felt relieved knowing Trevor would face real consequences, that he couldn't just move to another company and do the same thing to someone else without people knowing his history. I started therapy the following week to work through everything that had happened. My therapist was a woman in her 40s who specialized in psychological abuse, and she listened to my whole story without interrupting. When I finished, she explained that what Trevor did was called negging, a manipulation tactic where someone deliberately destroys another person's self-esteem to maintain control over them. She said Trevor had taken it to an extreme level, using it systematically over months to break me down so completely that I'd accept whatever he decided to do. Hearing her explain it in clinical terms helped me understand that it wasn't my fault, that Trevor had used a recognized abuse technique that works on lots of people. She said recovering would take time, but I'd already taken the hardest step by exposing him and getting out. 2 days later, my attorney called with information that shook me. A woman had contacted her office saying she was Trevor's ex-wife from a brief marriage 10 years ago. I didn't even know Trevor had been married before. The woman said she'd heard about my case through legal channels and wanted to provide testimony if needed because she'd experienced similar abuse from Trevor. My attorney arranged a call and the ex-wife told me her story. Trevor had called her stupid every day for 2 years, convinced her she was incompetent and lucky he put up with her, destroyed her confidence so thoroughly that she stayed in the marriage way longer than she should have. She said she'd been in therapy for years afterward, working through the damage he'd done, and hearing about my situation made her realize Trevor had a pattern of targeting women and systematically destroying them. I felt sick knowing I wasn't the first. Trevor had practiced these techniques on someone else and refined them before using them on me. But I also felt grateful she was brave enough to come forward, to help me prove that Trevor's behavior wasn't just a one-time mistake, but a deliberate pattern he'd repeated with multiple women. My attorney called 2 weeks later saying Trevor's lawyer wanted to negotiate. We met in a conference room downtown, and I sat across from Trevor for the first time since the gala. He looked awful, like he hadn't slept in days, but I felt nothing except tired. My attorney laid out everything we had, the texts, the fake accounts, the fraudulent credit card, the pattern with his ex-wife. Trevor's lawyer kept looking at his client like he wanted to be anywhere else. The negotiation took 3 hours, and Trevor tried to argue at first, saying I was exaggerating everything, but his lawyer shut him down fast. They offered $50,000, and my attorney laughed and said we'd see them in court for the criminal fraud charges. Trevor's face went white, and he whispered something to his lawyer. They came back with $100,000 and full responsibility for the debt. My attorney said $200,000 plus therapy costs, or we file charges tomorrow morning. Trevor signed the papers right there, his hand shaking so hard he could barely write his name. Walking out of that building felt like stepping into clean air after being trapped in a basement for months. Natalie texted me the next day, asking if I wanted to come to a support group she'd been attending. I almost said no because the idea of talking about Trevor to strangers made me want to throw up, but something made me agree. The group met in a community center basement on Thursday nights, and there were maybe 15 people sitting in a circle when I arrived. Natalie introduced me, and I sat down feeling like everyone could see right through me. A woman across the circle started talking about how her ex-husband convinced her she was stupid for 2 years, that she couldn't do anything right, that she was lucky he stayed with her. Another woman described her boyfriend isolating her from friends by making her feel embarrassed to be seen in public. A man talked about his ex-wife controlling every aspect of his life by threatening to leave whenever he tried to do anything independently. I sat there listening and realized Trevor hadn't invented anything new or special. Every tactic he used, every manipulation, every way he twisted my thoughts, it was all textbook. Other people in this room had experienced the exact same things from different abusers using the same playbook. I wasn't weak or stupid or uniquely broken. Trevor was just practiced at this, like he'd studied a manual on how to destroy someone. I texted my college roommate Sarah the next morning, someone I'd completely lost touch with during my relationship with Trevor. She called me back within 5 minutes and we talked for an hour. She admitted she'd thought something was wrong when I stopped coming to our friend group gatherings and stopped posting on social media, but she didn't know how to bring it up without making me defensive. We met for lunch that weekend, and she told me how abusers isolate their victims by making them too embarrassed or anxious to maintain friendships. Trevor had done exactly that by constantly calling me ugly in public, making me want to hide rather than see people. Sarah cried and apologized for not pushing harder, and I told her it wasn't her fault, that Trevor was good at making everything seem like my choice, when really he was controlling every option I had. 3 months after the gala, I stopped at a coffee shop near my apartment and ran into Trevor's boss's wife in line. She recognized me immediately and pulled me into a hug, saying I was incredibly brave for what I did that night. We sat down with our coffee and she told me the company had implemented new policies about reporting concerning behavior after my situation. Employees now had mandatory training on recognizing abuse and harassment, and there was a confidential reporting system for anyone who witnessed troubling behavior from colleagues. She said they couldn't undo what happened, but they were trying to prevent future situations where someone like Trevor could operate unchecked for so long. Hearing that my awful experience led to actual changes that might protect other people made something tight in my chest loosen just a little bit. My therapist and I had been meeting weekly, and one session I finally admitted something I'd been ashamed to say out loud. I miss Trevor sometimes. Not the real Trevor who abused me, but the version I thought he was before everything fell apart. My therapist didn't look surprised at all. She explained that I was mourning the person I thought he was, the relationship I believed I had, not the abuser he actually turned out to be. She said it was completely normal to grieve that loss even while knowing the relationship was toxic. The man I fell in love with never really existed. He was a mask Trevor wore to trap me, but my feelings for that mask were real, and losing that illusion hurt. Understanding that I could grieve what I thought I had while still knowing I made the right choice to leave helped me stop feeling guilty about the complicated mess of emotions I was carrying around. I started applying for jobs a month after the settlement, needing a fresh start somewhere nobody knew about Trevor or what happened. A marketing firm downtown called me in for an interview, and I was so nervous I almost canceled 3 times. The interview went well, and they offered me the position 2 days later. My new boss was a woman in her 50s who seemed genuinely kind, and when I explained during my first week that I might need flexibility for therapy appointments, she just nodded and said mental health was a priority, and to take whatever time I needed. Having coworkers who saw me as competent and professional, who had no idea about my history with Trevor, helped me remember who I was before he spent 4 months trying to convince me I was worthless. 6 weeks into my new job, I came home from work to find Trevor standing outside my apartment building. My whole body went cold and I pulled out my phone immediately, calling the police while staying far enough away that he couldn't reach me. He started yelling that he just wanted to talk, that I was being unreasonable, that we could work this out if I'd just listen. The police arrived within 10 minutes and arrested him right there on the sidewalk for violating the restraining order. He spent the night in jail, and my attorney told me later that his lawyer warned him if he tried to contact me again, he'd face serious criminal charges. Something about seeing him handcuffed and put in a police car finally made me believe he couldn't hurt me anymore. Natalie and I met for dinner a few weeks later, and she told me she was dating someone new. She'd been nervous to tell me, worried I'd be upset or think she was moving on too fast, but I was genuinely happy for her. She described how her new boyfriend treated her with respect and kindness, how he listened when she talked and supported her goals and never tried to control or manipulate her. Watching her face light up talking about him made me believe that maybe someday I could have that too, that Trevor hadn't ruined me for healthy relationships forever. We ordered dessert and toasted to her new relationship, and I realized I was truly happy for her success instead of bitter about my own situation. I used some of my settlement money to take a solo vacation to the beach, something I never would have done while with Trevor. He'd spent so much time convincing me I was too ugly to be seen in a bathing suit that the idea of going to a beach alone had seemed impossible. But I booked a week at a small beach town and spent my days lying in the sun reading books and swimming in the ocean. The first day I felt self-conscious and kept my cover up on, but by the third day I was walking around in just my swimsuit and nobody stared or pointed or acted like I was offensive to look at. Lying in the sun with my eyes closed, feeling the warmth on my skin and hearing the waves crash, felt like reclaiming my body as my own instead of something Trevor had the right to judge and criticize. My attorney called on a Friday afternoon to tell me the settlement was finalized and the money would hit my account within 24 hours. I checked my bank app obsessively all weekend and Monday morning there it was, $200,000 sitting in my checking account. I immediately transferred most of it to savings and used $30,000 to pay off my student loans completely. Watching that loan balance go to zero felt incredible, like I was erasing one more thing Trevor had tried to use against me. The rest sat in my savings account, giving me a cushion I'd never had before. Actual financial security that meant I never had to depend on anyone else again. I'd turned Trevor's abuse into my independence, and that felt like the best possible outcome from the worst situation of my life. A few months passed and I decided to try dating again. Nothing serious, just testing the waters to remember what normal felt like. I downloaded a couple of apps and went on a few coffee dates with guys who seemed nice enough. The third date was with someone named Alex who worked in finance and had a friendly smile in his photos. We met at a small Italian place downtown and talked about work and hobbies and our favorite movies. Everything felt easy and comfortable until he walked me to my car afterward and said I looked really beautiful tonight. I thanked him and got in my car and drove 3 blocks before I had to pull over, because I was crying so hard I couldn't see the road. I sat there in a grocery store parking lot sobbing for 20 minutes, and when I told my therapist about it the next week, she nodded like she'd been expecting this. She explained that after months of being told I was ugly every single day, hearing a genuine compliment triggered all the emotions I'd been holding back about how badly Trevor had damaged my self-esteem. She said crying was actually a healthy response, proof that I was letting myself feel things again instead of staying numb. I went on a few more dates after that, and each compliment got a little easier to hear without falling apart. Trevor's mother called me on a Tuesday afternoon about 6 months after the gala. I almost didn't answer when I saw her name on my phone, but curiosity won out. She asked if we could meet for lunch because she'd been working on some things in therapy and wanted to talk to me about them. I hesitated because part of me wanted nothing to do with anyone connected to Trevor, but another part of me needed closure with his family, who I'd actually liked before everything fell apart. I agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe the following Saturday, somewhere neutral where I could leave easily if the conversation went badly. She was already there when I arrived, looking older and more tired than I remembered, and she stood up to hug me before I could decide if I wanted that kind of contact. She started talking almost immediately, like she'd been rehearsing what to say. She told me she'd been seeing a therapist twice a week since the gala, working through her guilt about not protecting me from Trevor's abuse when she saw it happening right in front of her. She said she kept replaying that first dinner in her mind, the moment she dropped her wine glass when Trevor called me ugly, and how she should have said something stronger than just sitting there in shock. Then she told me she'd cut Trevor off financially until he agreed to get serious professional help for his abusive patterns, not just anger management but real intensive therapy to address why he felt entitled to destroy people he claimed to love. She'd also started volunteering with a domestic violence organization, helping other mothers recognize warning signs in their children's behavior before it escalated to what Trevor did to me. It didn't fix what happened or erase the 4 months of daily abuse, but I could see she was genuinely trying to do better and learn from her failure to act. We talked for 2 hours, and I left feeling like maybe some people really could change when they were forced to face what their inaction had cost. My boss called me into her office on a Thursday morning, and I spent the entire walk down the hallway convinced I was getting fired for some reason I couldn't identify. Instead, she told me I'd landed a huge client that everyone else in the department had been chasing for months, and she was promoting me to senior account manager effective immediately. She insisted we go tell the whole team together, and she stood in front of everyone and praised my work ethic and creativity and ability to understand what clients actually needed. Hearing professional recognition in front of my coworkers reminded me that I was genuinely good at my job, that I had real skills and value beyond what Trevor had tried to make me believe about myself. He'd spent so much time convincing me I was worthless that I'd started to doubt my own competence in every area of my life. Standing there accepting congratulations from my team felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that Trevor had tried to steal. Natalie called me a few weeks later asking if I'd be willing to present with her at a local women's group about recognizing psychological abuse in relationships. I was nervous about speaking publicly, but she convinced me that sharing our story might help other women identify red flags before they got in as deep as we had. We spent hours preparing together, deciding what parts of our experiences to share and how to frame them in ways that would be educational, rather than just traumatic. The presentation was on a Wednesday evening in a community center conference room with about 30 women in attendance. Natalie talked about her relationship with Trevor first, explaining how the control and manipulation had been subtle at first before escalating. Then I described the 4 months of being called ugly every day, and how I hadn't recognized it as abuse until Natalie showed me the evidence of Trevor's deliberate campaign. After we finished, At least a dozen women came up to thank us, and 3 of them said our presentation helped them realize their own partners were using similar tactics. One woman started crying and told us she'd been planning to marry someone who constantly criticized her appearance, and hearing our story made her understand she needed to get out. Walking to our cars afterward, Natalie and I both felt like maybe some good could come from the worst thing that ever happened to us. I started looking at bigger apartments in neighborhoods I actually wanted to live in, places with good coffee shops and parks within walking distance. My small apartment had been about affordability and quick escape from Trevor's place, but now I had the settlement money giving me options I'd never had before. I found a 2-bedroom unit with huge windows and hardwood floors in an area I'd always loved, but thought was too expensive. The extra bedroom could be an office or guest room, and the whole space felt bright and open in a way my current apartment didn't. I signed the lease and spent the next month decorating exactly how I wanted without worrying about anyone else's opinion on paint colors or furniture choices. Every piece I picked out felt like an act of reclaiming my own taste and preferences after 3 years of deferring to Trevor's judgment on everything. I bought a bright yellow couch because I loved it, not because it matched some predetermined color scheme. I hung art that made me happy, even though Trevor would have called it childish or unsophisticated. The apartment became completely mine in a way no space had been since before I met him. My therapist and I had our regular weekly session on a Tuesday afternoon, and she started by asking me to reflect on where I was 6 months ago versus where I was now. I talked about the dating, the job promotion, the presentation with Natalie, the new apartment, and how I was sleeping through the night most nights without nightmares about Trevor. She smiled and said she'd been thinking we might be ready to reduce our sessions from weekly to twice monthly. I felt a weird mix of pride and anxiety because weekly therapy had become my safety net, but I also recognized that I was genuinely doing better. We agreed to try the reduced schedule and see how it went, with the understanding that I could always come back to weekly if I needed it. Looking at how far I'd come from the woman who stood on that stage at the gala, barely holding herself together while exposing her abuser, made me realize I'd done tremendous work on healing. I could see the difference in how I carried myself now, how I spoke up when something bothered me instead of shrinking away, how I believed people when they complimented me instead of automatically assuming they were lying. I started writing in a journal about my experiences recovering from psychological abuse, just private thoughts at first about what I was learning in therapy and how I was processing everything. After a few weeks, I decided to start an anonymous blog, thinking maybe sharing my story publicly could help other people who were going through similar situations. I wrote about the warning signs I missed, the tactics Trevor used to destroy my self-esteem, the moment everything clicked at the gala, and the long process of rebuilding myself afterward. The response was completely overwhelming in the best way possible. Within a week, I had hundreds of comments from people sharing their own stories and thanking me for putting words to experiences they'd never been able to describe. People told me they'd sent my blog posts to friends or family members who were in abusive relationships, hoping it might help them recognize what was happening. Reading through the comments and messages made me realize how many people were silently struggling with psychological abuse that nobody around them recognized as abuse. Every story shared in my comments section felt like proof that speaking up at the gala, as terrifying as it was, had been absolutely the right choice. Trevor's brother sent me a text message inviting me to his daughter's 5th birthday party the following month. He made it very clear in the message that Trevor would not be there and was not welcome at family events anymore, and that they all still considered me part of the family regardless of what Trevor had done. I was surprised and touched that they wanted to maintain a relationship with me separate from Trevor. I showed up to the party with a present for his daughter and found his whole family there except Trevor. His mother hugged me when I arrived and introduced me to relatives I'd never met as someone very special to their family. His daughter ran up and asked where Uncle Trevor was, and her father gently explained that Uncle Trevor couldn't come to parties anymore because he'd made some bad choices. Being included in their lives independent of Trevor felt validating, like confirmation that the abuse wasn't my fault, and they didn't blame me for what happened. I stayed for the whole party and helped clean up afterward, and driving home I felt grateful that not everyone in Trevor's orbit had been poisoned by his manipulation. I went to a work conference in another city about professional development and networking strategies. The second day, there was a panel discussion about client relations, and afterward I was getting coffee when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned around to find a guy about my age with dark hair and an easy smile holding out his hand. He introduced himself as George and said he'd really appreciated my question during the panel about handling difficult client expectations. We talked for 20 minutes about work and the conference, and before we went to our separate sessions, he asked if I wanted to have dinner that evening. I said yes, even though my stomach was doing nervous flips because this felt different from the casual dating app meetings I'd been doing. Dinner was at a small restaurant near the conference hotel, and we talked for 3 hours about everything except work. On our second date 2 weeks later back in our home city, I told him about what happened with Trevor. I was terrified he'd think I was damaged or complicated, but he just listened without interrupting, and then thanked me for trusting him enough to share something so personal. He didn't treat me like I was broken or fragile, just like I was someone who'd survived something difficult and come out stronger. George and I started dating for real after that second date, but we took everything really slow. He never pushed me to move faster than I was ready for. And when I had bad days where I felt anxious or needed him to tell me again that he actually wanted to be with me, he did it without making me feel crazy or needy. He never called me ugly, not even as a joke when I woke up with messy hair or when I was sick with the flu. Instead, he told me he thought I was smart when I figured out a work problem, or funny when I made him laugh at dinner. He noticed things about me that had nothing to do with how I looked, like how I always remembered little details about his day, or how I got excited about trying new restaurants. Dating him felt completely different from dating Trevor, like I was finally seeing what a healthy relationship was supposed to look like. 1 year after the gala, I planned a dinner at my favorite restaurant to celebrate. I invited Natalie and my 3 closest friends, the ones who stuck by me through everything. We sat at a big round table and ordered too much food and wine, and when the server brought our drinks, Natalie stood up to make a toast. She raised her glass and said we were celebrating survival, speaking up and building lives that weren't controlled by men who tried to destroy us. Everyone clinked glasses, and I felt this wave of gratitude for these women who showed up for me when I needed them most. We spent 3 hours at that restaurant, laughing and sharing stories, and I realized I hadn't felt this genuinely happy in years. The gala felt like something that happened to a different person, someone I used to be before I learned how strong I actually was. My blog kept growing, and people kept asking me to share more, so I decided to start a podcast. I called it Unbroken, and each episode featured me interviewing another person who survived emotional abuse in relationships. The first few episodes I was nervous and stumbled over my words, but by episode 10 I found my rhythm. People started downloading it like crazy, and within 6 months I had thousands of regular listeners. Reading the reviews and messages from people who said my podcast helped them recognize their own bad relationships or gave them courage to leave gave me this sense of purpose I never had before. I wasn't just healing myself anymore, I was helping other people heal too. Every Tuesday I recorded a new episode in my apartment, and every week I heard from someone new who wanted to share their story. I got an email one morning from a woman asking to meet for coffee. She said she was Trevor's ex-wife from his first marriage and she'd been following my podcast. I didn't even know Trevor had been married before. He never mentioned it. We met at a coffee shop near my apartment, and she was this quiet, gentle woman in her 40s who looked tired. She told me she married Trevor right out of college and divorced him 5 years later, after he spent those years slowly breaking down her confidence with the same tactics he used on me. She said listening to my podcast helped her finally stop blaming herself for staying as long as she did, that hearing someone else describe the exact same manipulation made her realize it wasn't her fault. We talked for 2 hours about how Trevor operated, comparing notes like we were solving a puzzle together. When we left, she hugged me and thanked me for being brave enough to speak up publicly, and I felt grateful that something good came out of what Trevor did to both of us. 6 months into dating, George met my friends and family at a barbecue my parents threw. I was nervous because I wanted everyone to like him, but also because I knew they'd be comparing him to Trevor without meaning to. George was relaxed and friendly, helping my dad with the grill and asking my mom about her garden. He talked to my friends about their jobs and remembered details I'd told him about each of them. After dinner, my best friend pulled me into the kitchen while we were getting dessert and told me I seemed like a completely different person with George. She said I was lighter, more confident, more like myself than I'd been in the 3 years I dated Trevor. I hadn't realized how much Trevor changed me until I saw myself through her eyes with someone who actually treated me well. 2 weeks later, I got a voicemail from someone who said she was a book agent in New York. She'd been listening to my podcast and wanted to talk about turning my story into a book about recognizing and getting over emotional abuse. The idea scared me because writing a whole book felt huge, but it also felt like a chance to reach even more people than the podcast could. I called her back and we talked for an hour about what the book might look like, who it would help, how my story could prevent other people from going through what I did. She said publishers were looking for exactly this kind of personal story that could also work as a guide for others. I told her I needed to think about it, but I was already thinking yes. Around the same time, a mutual friend reached out saying Trevor wanted to meet with me in person. The friend said Trevor claimed he'd changed and wanted to apologize face-to-face, that he'd been in therapy and understood now what he did wrong. I felt my stomach drop when I read the message, but then I felt angry that Trevor thought he could just decide when and how we talked after everything he put me through. I forwarded the message to my attorney and told her to respond that I wasn't interested in meeting Trevor, that I didn't need his apology to keep moving forward, because I'd already done my healing without him. My attorney sent a formal response through her office, and Trevor didn't try to contact me again after that. I signed the book deal 3 weeks later and started writing. The agent connected me with an editor who helped me organize my experiences into chapters that made sense, starting with how I met Trevor and ending with the gala. Writing it all down was harder than I expected because I had to relive a lot of bad memories, but it also felt good to turn everything into something that might stop other people from ending up where I was. George was amazing through the whole process, bringing me tea while I wrote late at night and listening when I needed to talk through a difficult chapter. He read early drafts and gave me feedback, always making sure I felt supported but never trying to change my story or tell me what to include. Having him there made the hard parts easier. 18 months after the gala, my book came out. The response was bigger than anything I imagined. Within the first week, I got hundreds of emails and messages from women sharing their own stories and thanking me for putting words to experiences they never knew how to describe. Several organizations that worked with abuse victims asked me to come speak at their events, and suddenly I had a calendar full of talks and book readings scheduled for the next 6 months. Reading reviews from people who said my book helped them leave bad relationships or recognize warning signs they'd been missing made all the painful writing worth it. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was actually making a difference. At one of my book readings in the city, I was halfway through reading a chapter when I noticed Trevor's mother sitting in the third row. My voice caught for a second, but I kept going, and after I finished and opened the floor for questions, she raised her hand. She stood up and told the whole room that she was Trevor's mother, and she failed to protect me when she first heard him call me ugly at that dinner. Her voice shook as she talked about how she made excuses for her son instead of calling out his behavior, how she let her fear of family conflict matter more than my safety. She said she was sharing her story because she wanted other parents and family members in the audience to understand that staying silent when you see abuse makes you part of the problem. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment, and then people started clapping. After the event, I found her outside and we stood on the sidewalk talking. She apologized again, and I told her that coming here tonight and being publicly honest took real courage. We didn't fix everything between us, but it felt like a start. 6 months after the book tour ended, George made dinner at home, and I could tell something was different by the way he kept adjusting the candles on our small kitchen table. We sat down to eat and he barely touched his food, just kept looking at me with this nervous smile until finally he put down his fork and said he loved me for my strength and intelligence and compassion, and he wanted to spend his life with me if I'd let him. I said yes before he even finished pulling the ring box from his pocket, because I knew this relationship was built on respect and genuine partnership, not control and manipulation like what I had with Trevor. We started planning a small wedding right away, just close friends and family because neither of us wanted anything big or showy. I asked Natalie to be my maid of honor over coffee one morning, and she started crying immediately, saying she never imagined that night at the gala would lead to such a beautiful friendship between us. We picked a date 3 months out, and I felt excited instead of anxious, which was so different from how I felt planning my life with Trevor. On my wedding day, I stood in front of the mirror in my dress and thought about how Trevor spent 4 months trying to convince me I was ugly, and I smiled because I finally saw myself clearly now. I wasn't just beautiful. I was strong and brave and worthy of real love, and no one could take that away from me again. George and I moved into a small house together after the wedding and filled it with respect and laughter and genuine affection. I still went to therapy twice a month to keep working on myself, and I continued doing my advocacy work and speaking at events, but mostly I was just happy in a deep and secure way that came from knowing exactly who I was. Some mornings I'd wake up and George would already be making coffee and he'd smile at me and say good morning without any hidden insults or manipulation, and I'd think about how far I'd come from that woman who believed she was ugly because someone told her so every single day. The advocacy work kept growing, and I got invited to speak at more events, sharing my story with people who needed to hear that they could survive psychological abuse and build better lives afterward. Natalie and I stayed close friends and had lunch together every few weeks, and sometimes we'd talk about Trevor and everything that happened, but mostly we just talked about our current lives and supported each other through normal everyday things. I kept writing too, working on a follow-up book about the recovery process and what healing actually looks like when you do the hard work. George supported everything I did without trying to control or diminish it, and that made all the difference in how I showed up in the world now.